Lehnen, or as I wrote, Timothy Thunder Lehnen, and you know him because he is the executive director of Drupal Association. I don't have to say any more, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to meet you all. Good morning. I have a few things that I'd love to talk about today and to share with all of you. If we can unlock my laptop here. Okay, so in particular, what I want to talk about actually goes beyond just open source specifically and talks about horizons in digital publishing and in ambitious digital experiences. So I want to thank the Thunder team for inviting me to speak at this event because as the executive director of the Drupal Association, and as you know, as Thunder is a distribution built on Drupal 8, the success and future of Thunder and the success and future of the Drupal project are very closely tied together. And I think that these concepts, these horizons for the next generation of digital experience are going to be interrelated for both Drupal as a project and for Thunder as a distribution in this digital publishing platform space. So to dive right in, I actually want to talk about news from less than 24 hours ago, which is to say that the InSight lander has just landed on Mars. This is its first non-lens cap covered photo sent back to us from Mars. And what this shows us, among other things, is the Martian horizon. And I come from a family of scientists, and the topic of exploring the next horizon is pretty near and dear to my heart. My grandfather worked for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory during the Space Shuttle era, and later for the National Science Foundation. And something we learn from looking at space exploration, from the concept of looking at the next horizon in any experience, is that as a human species, we're never satisfied with where we are and what we've done. We never reach a summit and say, here we are, and we're done. We never cross an ocean and say there are no more oceans to cross. And when we've mapped and explored an entire planet, Earth, our home, we never say there are no other worlds to explore. So as explorers, we're always looking for new horizons, whatever's beyond. And there's a couple ways to think about this in terms of human behavior and about our sense of never being satisfied with where we are. There's a cynical answer, a cynical understanding of what this means. And the cynical answer is that because technical challenges are in many ways easier than human ones, we're drawn to them. Landing a research vessel on Mars, as incredible as that is, and with the cooperation that it took from the United States and Europe and organizations around the world, that's much easier than solving disease, hunger, or inequality at home. On the other hand, the aspirational answer to why we are never satisfied and why we continue to explore and look for horizons is that this exploration comes from a place of hope. It says that in searching for these new horizons, we find new ways to understand ourselves at home and new opportunities to solve some of those human problems. So all of that sounds very grandiose, but I think it's also very relevant to conversations we're having here today, because the people in this room are the people who mediate human interactions with each other online. People in this room are the people who tell the narrative of our culture and of current events. And we have our own new horizons in that space to explore. So today I'm going to talk about 4 horizons in digital publishing and in ambitious digital experiences in general. And these will relate to a lot of the conversations that are happening later today. So first, I want to talk a little bit about omnichannel and how it relates to multi-channel experiences. In particular, let's go over some history of what really it means to talk about a multi-channel experience. There's kind of a common misconception that multi-channel experiences are new to the digital age or a unique part of the digital age, and they're really not. It's very simply just the ability to interact with an audience across multiple channels in various markets. And so it's not a new concept, and it's not uniquely digital. Retail institutions did this as soon as they started advertising in print, as well as in their stores, on radio, on television. Multi-channel commerce first existed in the form of paper catalogs, mail order catalogs, the Sears catalog in 1894. It's probably the first multi-channel commerce experience. But that said, omni-channel and multi-channel are not necessarily the same things. So in one sense, digital presence is the latest addition to a multi-channel portfolio that goes across all sorts of publishing media, that goes across all sorts of commerce media and things like that. But in contrast, omni-channel experiences are this next generation of multi-channel experiences, the next evolution, and they can only exist in a digital space. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean. Omni-channel experiences enable intelligence across all of these channels to create a narrative experience for the audience, regardless of which channel they go to and come from. So there are some key features that enable this, but in essence what this means is that when I have an interaction with a point of sale in an online sense, and then I go into a retail environment, I'm going to see something that welcomes me back and says, hi, I see you put that in your cart. Here's a discount. It's here in store. You can actually try it on. All these sorts of things that create a narrative thread rather than just simply pushing to a variety of platforms. To enable this, though, you need a technical platform that has a number of key features. Atomic content, which is the sense of having these individual components of content on your platform that can be pushed to these different channels. Programmatic placement that uses intelligence to say when these pieces of atomic content need to be shown together or shown across channels. You need your funnels to become narrative, as I described. So you need these conversations, you need this presentation of content and published material to tell a story to your audience, not just within the individual content piece, but across the experiences that they're having as they engage with your brand and your platform. You also may need things like spatial computing and personalization. What I mean by that is understanding where people are physically, where they've interacted with various elements of your brand, and personalizing to what activity they've done before. And there's some challenges in this space, most notably around trust and privacy, because a lot of these elements involve, in some way, tracking your user, or otherwise understanding how they work, what content they consume, and what their interests are. And of course, in the post-GDPR era, we have to be careful about how we build these interactions and experiences. The next horizon that I'd like to talk about briefly is this concept of AI first. And artificial intelligence, of course, being what that really stands for, but I'm going to talk about it in terms of artificial insight. And I'll explain what I mean. So, proper artificial intelligence or artificial insight really goes beyond voice recognition. I mean, I think you'll recognize the logos here. We have Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant. These are the voice platforms that users are increasingly using as part of their content consumption experiences and as part of their productivity tools. However, there's constraints. These have to recognize natural language. And so the main reason, a voice assistant, voice recognition is not artificial intelligence by itself. Where the intelligence comes in is the fact that it has to have natural language understanding. And natural language understanding really means insight into the purpose of what you're asking for and interpolation of the intent of the user. So knowing that when I make a voice command type statement, interpreting what that actually means, what the intent of my statement is, not the literal content of my words. And those are the building blocks of this interaction with these virtual assistants, which will take them from simply being assistants to being insightful enhancements of productivity. Relating back to this previous horizon, this omni-channel horizon that's on the forefront of publishing coming up, these interactions with artificial intelligence have to be omni-channel experiences. They have to be aware of the multiple ways that you interact with your devices, the ways that you interact with content in different places. They need to know if you've read something in a digital publishing platform, if you've heard it narrated to you by your voice assistant, if you are going to a location referenced by some other content you interacted with. They need to have that sense of history and narrative that can only be enabled by these omni-channel experiences that are the next evolution of multi-channel experiences. So again, some key features of this AI-first landscape. Again, we see atomic content becomes important. These componentized, smaller units of content. Programmatic placement, again. Natural language recognition, location awareness, narrative funnels, or also the concept of sort of digital twins, the notion that you have a of digital or virtual representation of another physical interaction medium, so that you can, say, experience digitally what an interaction might look like when it's done physically, as a way of understanding how those channels work. And there's some unique challenges here as well in terms of accessibility and in terms of productivity. Productivity being the tricky one. When there's no insight, when there's no real intelligence behind these sort of voice interactions, then they're not really productivity tools. They're just another medium that you have to translate your conversation into without gaining anything significant on the productivity side. But all these interactions need advanced analytics, conversational UIs, and predictive personalization. So that's our second horizon. The third horizon in publishing platforms and digital experiences is decentralization, concept of self-sovereignty, and what I'm calling Tim Berners-Lee's next web. And so there's a bundle of things here, and I'm not going to go into as much detail on things like how the blockchain will disrupt some of these things as, say, Ingo would have. But the concepts of decentralization and sovereignty is that the user begins to have control of their identity, their data, and their content. So Tim Berners-Lee created the Solid project, which is one version of a project along these lines. It basically means that individual users have personal online data stores. They control their data. They control their content production. What they grant to other publishing platforms or to social networks or to medical device systems is only access tokens to personal data that's housed and controlled themselves. So this is a sense of personal empowerment and decentralization. This has been tried before. It's new. It's certainly a horizon. But Diaspora and Mastodon are two social networks that were built on these concepts. And you'll notice that these are not names that are household names the way Facebook or Google Plus or Twitter really are. And there's some reasons for that I'll get into in a moment. But for decentralization and sovereignty to work, you need structured data standards. These decentralized sort of self-sovereign stores of personal information need to be interoperable with each other and with the systems that need to consume them. And so, of course, they need to have this interoperability by design. They also need to have granular notions of privacy and personal control of user data. And they need built-in expiry of access, so that once you've granted some portal access to some of your information, you can say, this goes away in 24 hours, or this goes away when I say it goes away. And there's challenges here, one of them obviously being trust. I would add, actually, I probably should have put it on here, complexity. An individual user understanding how to control their own sort of personal data store is really a tricky way to think about the next generation of the web. But the other problem is the network effect. And by that I mean people aren't going to abandon Facebook in droves for one of these decentralized social networks if the majority of their personal networks are still on those closed platforms. So one of the biggest challenges to the adoption of a decentralized model is, yes, it has all these benefits, it has all these considerations in terms of improved privacy and control, but does the general population actually care, or is their primary motivation convenience and connection to as many people as possible? And that's a very tricky question. So there's an example that I also want to point out about how platforms like Drupal in general, or Thunder specifically, are still really quite relevant in a decentralized or self-sovereign publishing environment. So this is, I won't just read the whole slide to you, but this is an example from MIT about their medical records prototype. And this talks about how you could use a blockchain model to do medical record exchange and to have expiring access to medical records. What I think is really interesting, and something that is surprising to a lot of people who are in this early phase of learning about what the blockchain means in terms of content storage, is the sentence there that says, the raw medical record content is never stored on the blockchain, but rather kept securely in providers' existing data storage infrastructure. Now, this is a medical example, but this applies to any kind of digital publishing platform or data platform, which is that there are still content management systems under the surface that are actually handling the majority of the content. And things like this blockchain, these blockchain controls, these are your access layer, your expiry layer, the way that you provide checks against tampering and a notion of trust. So, in this case, a patient retrieves and downloads data from providers' databases when this gatekeeper application can check the blockchain, confirms access and ownership rights, and things like that. Fourth horizon that I'd like to talk about in terms of publishing is emerging markets, the next billion users of the web, something that is going to be critical for everybody, whether it's in just the publishing world or really any kind of web or digital connected experience. And the kind of primary insight is the next billion consumers will probably never own a personal computer. They will use mobile devices, and they're not just mobile-first experiences, they're mobile-only experiences. And I don't just mean content consumption, I also mean content production. Any way that they interact with a digital experience, any way that they participate online is going to be done primarily through this mobile device, through these mobile channels. And when I say the next billion, I probably mean the next 3 billion. Like, it's not likely that the PC is going to come back into these emerging markets. It's just that the new norm is going to be mobile on the basis of the next billion users having built their whole interaction. The other thing is this means that they're going to have platform loyalty rather than brand loyalty specifically, right? All of their interactions with content are mediated through their devices and through whatever modes of access exist on those devices. So they'll be loyal to their platform, to their device, and to the applications that exist on that device, but not necessarily to particular brands. So for example, if they're using aggregators or if they're using particular web portals, they'll be loyal to those, but not necessarily loyal to specific publications or things like that in the same way. And the biggest challenge in this space, especially for open source projects and especially for the open web in general, is closed publishing platforms. It's the notion that people might make Facebook pages instead of real websites, that they may promote stores with Instagram pages instead of websites, that they might do their whole content production network on closed ecosystems like YouTube or things like that. And those are things to bear in mind as we explore this area. So again, these users may also not consider these experiences web experiences in the same way that we commonly consider most of these platforms experiences, because they're not browsing them through the web. They're doing them through dedicated apps. They're doing them through the voice interactions and AI interactions that we talked about previously. And these sort of self-contained digital experience portals that they may interact with from time to time. So whether that's their local government's civics portal, their voting platforms, things like that. So again, the same challenges as I talked about before, but over here, what we see is that these users may not have the option or a preference to interact with an experience that's incompatible with the platform of choice, right? So in other words, for any publisher of content for the next billion users, we have to go where they are. They may have no option of using something that's outside of the closed ecosystem of their local version of Android that is dominant in their market, or whatever the case may be. So across these 4 horizons, there are some common themes that I pointed out and that I'm sure you noticed as I was going through here that unify the kind of technological underpinnings of how we pursue these horizons as we move forward in digital publishing and in content management. So what are these commonalities in the digital experience horizon? Structured data, atomic and reusable components, API-driven interactions, interoperability, decoupled architectures, rich user experiences, granular privacy and permissions, analytics and personalization. These are the same concepts that you saw 2 or 3 of in every other slide and every other category of digital horizon that we're talking about today. So an interesting observation about all of those things on the previous slide is that those are standards and protocols. Those aren't specific technologies. I'm not talking about using React or using Thunder or using Drupal specifically. I'm talking about the ways that we interact with things, the kinds of interoperability that these technologies create rather than specific technologies. And they require on a flexible stack to orchestrate them. Now, on the positive side, and of course because I come from the Drupal Association and we're here at a Thunder event, what's exciting about these opportunities and about these horizons is, these are horizons for the entire digital experience market, but Thunder in particular and things built on the Drupal ecosystem are uniquely well positioned to adopt these kinds of standards and protocols. We already have feature sets that begin to make it possible to explore some of these horizons coming into play on these platforms. So I know we started a little bit late, but if there's any brief questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Too fast for me, but I made it in time on the stage. Yeah, first of all, thank you for the speech. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them. You can also ask in German if you think or afraid that your English is even worse than mine is. We are translating it, so please don't hesitate to ask any questions to Tim if you have them. Ask them in Portuguese, in German, but ask. You have the unique possibility.